Hello there, listeners. A happy Yuletide, Merry Christmas 2017, and welcome to the special Christmas Eve podcast on Radio Visca. So, traditionally, Christmas Eve is actually a fairly important date in the Germanic world. But as I live in the Anglo-Saxon world at this point in time, Christmas Eve is less of an important event, and so I've got the evening free, so to speak, from family commitments, from any kind of social commitments, and I felt like giving you all a podcast, making a podcast for you guys, just looking back at the year 2017 first off. And then trying to make some predictions for 2018 in the second part. I'm outside my house. It's fairly windy, so apologies in advance if the microphone gets a bit noisy when there's a wind gust. But I just needed some fresh air, and I've recently been doing most of my podcasts outside, just speaking into my phone, and the sound quality's been good enough so far, so should be fine. If it's really unbearable, then I'll have to edit around it. So 2017, I'd have to say, what a year. Jesus. It's really, we are in the age of hyper-history. So quite in opposition to what Francis Fukuyama, said at the turn of the millennium, this sort of idea of the end of history. I think that's absolute humbug, and what we really have is the century of hyper-history, where so much happens every year. So much is moving, changes are so quick in the world, and we're really seeing the breakdown of almost every and any established system that we're used to from the 20th century. So I made a bit of a list of notable events that I thought were worth commenting on. So 2017, well, obviously it started with the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, from a nationalist or ethno-nationalist right-wing perspective, Trump has done some good things simply by being the US president, having that sort of reach in the media and being able to, basically just shift the Overton window to the right. I think that's been useful, but I think anyone who's got any illusions about Trump, hopefully by this point, after a year, has been disabused of them. He is very pro-Zionist. He's quite centrist in terms of his policies. He's obviously having a very hard time considering just the assault from the Democrats on him, and I would argue it's not just the Democrats, it's the Republicans as well. It's basically anyone who believes he's not fully under control has been trying to take him down. This is basically the entire American establishment. There's obviously some segment that it has his back, otherwise he'd be gone already by now. And I struggle at times to identify that segment. Maybe you guys have a better idea, but I think there's some support in the military for him. Clearly a lot of his cabinet is ex-Pentagon. But yeah, it's. There's clearly support from Israel, which Netanyahu and co, from AIPAC, Likud. So that's probably quite important. Yeah, but the forces arrayed against him, the vultures. That's been quite a sight to behold, and I don't live in the United States, so I don't know how the general opinion in the public is, down on the... Basically, I don't trust anything I read in the news at all anymore. So, and I don't, trust polls or statistics. So who knows what the actual average man on the street actually thinks about Trump and what's been happening. But clearly, if you look at the resistance on Twitter, I mean, they're just all batshit crazy, right? So Twitter will be another topic I'll talk about. But first, what else have I got here? Apologies if the audio gets a bit buzzy, but I've noticed that when I use the actual touch screen in the middle of a recording, it sort of buzzes. What else happened in 2017? We had Bitcoin, the year that Bitcoin became mainstream and went into a crazy bubble. Not much to say about that, except watch out for your money. Don't stick it all into Bitcoin. And I think we haven't seen anything yet when it comes to cryptocurrency, but it's certainly been quite a ride for anyone who's held any cryptocurrency. I think that's going to continue into 2018 as a major topic, so I'll kind of leave that for that. What else has been big in 2017? Not well covered in the mainstream media, but I think this has been a huge event, and that's been the Saudi shakeup. Apologies, I don't have any kind of written prep with me, but I don't know. Saudi names are kind of hard to remember, right? But basically, the Crown Prince, as far as I understand it, this is a theory and nobody's, kind of confirmed this really. I mean, this is totally in the realm of conspiracy theory, but the idea seems to be that the whole thing in Las Vegas, blamed on Paddock, was actually a sort of assassination attempt on the Saudi Crown Prince by this sort of alternate faction in the royal family there, and he's obviously was saved by... There's some video going around of him being sort of, someone who looks like him being escorted out of the hotel there, the casino, by, kind of armed guards, American sort of SWAT / special forces type guys. So the saying, or the rumors are that, ever since he survived, that there's been a massive crackdown in Saudi Arabia, and, people have been executed left, right, and center, tortured, imprisoned, and there's basically been a sort of a Game of Thrones kind of royal family intrigue, where vast numbers of people have basically been assassinated or imprisoned. Now, who knows how much truth is to that? Obviously, Saudi Arabia, you're not going to hear anything really, exactly on what's going on. We know for sure that they're in financial trouble. The oil price has been too low for them for too long. They have revenue problems. They're trying to cut corners. And it looks like, they're literally torturing some of the rich people in the royal family to kind of steal their money. So that's another thing that's kind of gone under the radar, and interestingly has coincided with, I believe, Israel opening an embassy in Riyadh, and a de facto Israeli-Saudi alliance against Lebanon and Iran and Shia Alawites, Syria. Lebanon, of course, the Hezbollah, that's a big one. If you guys want to read up on that, that's quite fascinating. I won't go into it any further, but that's another one to watch for 2018. What else happened? Interesting events surrounding the EU fighting the Visegrad countries, so Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic, all these sort of countries that haven't been diversified yet, basically being forced to take migrants, and being basically forced through their membership in the EU to diversify. So that's been a kind of like a showing of the hand, so to speak, a removal of the mask, of the velvet glove, and showing of the iron fist there, really, because as we know, the populations, I would argue that populations in the West don't want this either, but in the East, they're far less brainwashed, and they're far more vigorous in opposing, but by the way, what a lot of them have seen in the West, right? So when the Poles are against diversification, that's because a large amount of Poles have worked in England, and they know what London's like, right? So they go home and they're like, hell no, we don't want this shit at home. There's a large contingent of sort of carpenters and construction workers that sort of do temporary work in the UK and Germany, France. They often do go home because Poland's not a bad country, and they build themselves houses for, a fraction of the price that it would cost in the west of Europe, and then they have a good life, They're not in the Eurozone, so the exchange rate helps them in that regard. So forced diversification for Eastern Europe. That's echoing pretty hard there. We'll see how that turns out in 2018. Another one is basically Russian victory in Syria. Russian, Iranian, Lebanese victory, Hezbollah victory in Syria. ISIS is basically dead. The Americans and the Kurds and the Turks contained, defeated. I wouldn't call the Americans and the Kurds defeated, but I would say that the amount of territory they ended up holding and the amount of sort of is less than maybe was feared by the Syrians and the Russians. So certainly you can't call it a Syrian victory, really, because, their country's in shambles and there's still large amounts of territory that are not held by the Syrian government. But the full collapse has basically been stopped. And I think this probably coincides with, some of the chaos that's been happening in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and, Yemen, and really, the support for the modest rebels has just, collapsed. And interestingly, Trump did end the CIA supply and equip and train a program for the rebels in Syria. So that's had a big impact. That war will probably smolder on in 2018. But I would argue the intensity has unless Israel really goes in heavy now, it might shift to the west. But for now, I think things are contained there. What else happened in 2017? Well, we had the North Korea madness. I don't think there's going to be a war. It's much too dangerous. I think North Korea is just going to continue developing nuclear weapons. And in a way, they are a model for anyone else who wants to get off the growth and globalization train. Because, all it takes is nuclear weapons, and then you can live like in the 40s or 50s, right? You don't have to compete with everyone else. So, interesting. 2018, there's going to be more and more tests. There's going to be more, chaos around it, threats, tensions. But I don't see anything fundamentally crazy going on there because war is just too dangerous. So they're just going to try to starve the country to death with sanctions. And then probably eventually there'll be some kind of deal, the way there was with Iran. What else is there? NFL meltdown. Good riddance. Fuck the NFL, and hopefully that fucking, sports ball, opiate for the masses just goes the way of the dinosaur. That coincides with a general acceleration of the mainstream media collapse. That was 2016, obviously, during the Trump campaign, it sort of kicked off, but I think in 2017, large parts of the population started, in all over the West, started getting really clued in that, the media basically lies almost all the time and works against the population. interesting little event that potentially some people missed. There's this Home Office, Home Office, or the Office for Home Affairs in the United Kingdom. I'm not entirely sure what the exact title is, but a Member of Parliament, Yvette Cooper, runs that at the moment, or did at least in 2017. And they had a social media hate speech event or hearing. I think that was in early December, and they basically grilled representatives of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube over hate speech content that hadn't been taken down from the platform quickly enough. And what do they mean with hate speech? Well, obviously Red Eyes TV. And you think I'm joking, but that's literally what they mentioned. So there's quite an interesting exchange there between the representatives of the social media companies and Yvette Cooper, this British member of the Ministry of Love, Ministry of Truth, this traitor, this puppet, this golem. She basically compared Red Eyes TV to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now this is, in the UK Parliament essentially. So, Henrik, you're famous, that I recommend that everyone, because this is only like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, so I recommend everyone read up on you're able to, just do a bit of a Google, you'll be able to find it. There's some articles about it in TechCrunch. Sorry, the train's going by here. Yep, they really need to work on their wheels. That's terrible. All right. I hope that hopefully that's sort of quietened down here now, and you can hear me again. Now, something that didn't make quite as many headlines in 2017 as in previous years was the migrant crisis. But as far as I understand it, the numbers are just ever increasing. So there's no decrease in numbers. It's just a decrease in media attention. So, as far as I understand it, the route has changed, from the Balkans to, Italy, and then it changed from Italy again to Spain primarily. The numbers are increasing. There's no diminishment. I think particularly Italy is just, and is just being hammered, right? Anyone who thinks this is not a huge issue, this is just wild, right? Europe is being absolutely overrun, and this is going to continue. They're just not going to mention it anymore. You're just going to go into the city. You're just going to go into any town. You're going to go into the bloody countryside, and there's going to be more blacks than whites. That's how it's going to fucking be, it's already like that in a lot of places in Europe. So it's the South Africanization of Europe, really, right? It's just shocking, and this is just going to keep on going because the media is so in the hands of you-know-who and the politicians as well, and the legal system, that no effective collective response can be mounted. Anyone who openly speaks about the actual issues goes to jail, essentially, right? So until people start resisting more openly, this is going to continue. What else? Thoughtgate. Thoughtgate was a good one. I think that was was good that that happened. I think we need to remember that feminism is the part of the problem, and women should be having kids, not fucking making YouTube videos and asking for donations, right? Especially if they're mixed race or Jewish, right? How can you be an identitarian? Give me a fucking break. What else? China. So China, I think, is just playing the long game. I mean, they're basically, I think what they're doing is they're like, look at this fucking shit going on in the West. We're just going to sit back and eat some popcorn. They are continuing, obviously, with their upgrades in the military. They're continuing to build their islands. They're continuing with their train links, the One Belt, One Road initiative. They're just going to quietly continue rolling out infrastructure and military hardware. And, I think they have a lot more ability to weather hardship. So say there is an economic downturn or a credit crisis, I think the Chinese have a better ability to just suppress any dissent, and they have vast numbers of ethnic Chinese poor people who are used to poverty anyway. I read an article recently. They basically, Beijing has gone up to 23 million inhabitants, which is a huge growth. That's a mega city, right? And the Communist Party basically has said, nah, we want to cap it at 20 million. So they've gone into the, migrant labor camps and just bulldozed them. And these are not camps. These are like old, kind of Chinese buildings. They've just gone and there's pictures online, you can Google it. It looks like Syria. They're just like, yeah, you fuckers have got to leave. So that's how shit rolls in China, right? I think they're going to go and continue quietly achieving and getting stronger. And interesting. For example, their car industry is starting to really undermine the Western manufacturers. In the UK, MG has now kind of relaunched. Basically, the Chinese bought the MG brand. They made a whole bunch of different models, pretty well priced. And, they're made in China, all of them, and they're selling as MGs on the British market. They did the same in Germany, actually. Old brand, 1960s, called Burgwart, sort of like, Maybach or something like that. Just a German brand that went bankrupt back in the day. They've bought that up and they've making cars under that brand. And they're sort of headquartered in Germany, in Stuttgart. They're like a fake German company, and they, as I understand it, have received approval to start selling in the EU as well. And further afield in South America, they've been a strong supplier already for a while now. And I believe in Australia, in New Zealand, they've breached the market, obviously, as well. And obviously, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc. So this is something not many people are aware of, but the Chinese are no longer just making plastic shit. They obviously they've taken over a lot of the manufacturing from Japan and Taiwan and Korea, but they're also going to eat into the manufacturing from Europe and the United States. Car manufacturers and other things like supercomputers, etc. And weapons as well. I believe that Chinese weapons manufacturers will also start, exporting at some point stronger. Sorry about the wind. It's really picked up here now, so I'm just trying to find somewhere where it's a little bit sheltered. Yeah, I think I've got somewhere here. Alright, what else is on my list? I guess the final thing that I've got, not to make this too long, is Catalonia. That's been quite interesting. I think that's going to continue festering into 2018. And then heightened tensions between Israel and Lebanon, or Hezbollah specifically, and Iran obviously being the proxy force that supports Hezbollah. Is there going to be a war between them in 2018? It's possible. I would not consider it totally out of the realm of possibility. I consider it much more likely than a war between North Korea and the United States. So I'd give that a... For 2018, I mean, there's obviously going to be... There's basically bombing every year, right? I mean, Israel's been bombing Hezbollah arms shipments like on a monthly basis, really, in Syria, right? And they... use the Lebanese airspace at their leisure, right? I mean, they are routinely, daily, basically violating United Nations resolutions by just flying around in Lebanon as if it's their own country. But is there going to be a real full-on war, you know, with ground incursion? I'd give it a 40% likelihood for 2018. Maybe even higher, maybe even 50 to 60%. Now, what are we not going to see in 2018? No self-driving cars. Anyone who believes that shit is around the corner is just like a retard. No widespread adoption of AR or VR or any of that kind of gimmickry. I think the population in the West is saturated with media. I mean, people just don't give a fuck anymore, right? They don't have the money to buy the fucking equipment anymore. And they're sick of consumption, really, right? I mean, Netflix. I mean, there's video games coming out of everyone's ears. There's smartphones. There's TV. I think the market is saturated. There is just no one who's really interested in this shit, right, on a widespread level. And you see that. And this AI stuff that they rolled out for, you know, Apple now. There's these new AR-ish kind of apps on iOS. And does anyone really give a rat's ass? Not really, right? I mean, people basically are not very excited about technological, like, entertainment advances. And these kind of long lines, you know, for smartphone launches and this kind of stuff, that's just over now. I mean, I think for the latest iPhones, the lines were like 10 people or something, right? I mean, yeah. What else? We're just going to see continued deterioration in the US and Europe. I'd say I would predict at least 3 or 4 major terrorist attacks. I mean, if you look at the last few years, that's an optimistic prediction. What else? There will probably be an increase in legal measures against whites, essentially. I mean, they'll be under the banner of diversity, but essentially and we had just had in the UK that, you know, boards of listed companies can no longer be all white. I think the worst countries from a diversification, enrichment point of view, that are going to suffer ever more in 2018 are France, Belgium, UK, and Sweden. I think in Germany, first of all, it's a larger country, right? And also, you know, in a lot of places in Germany, you can't get away with a lot of shit. You know, the population will still kind of rouse on the migrants, and you know, they're not like the Swedes where they just kind of roll over and take it up the arse. I mean, I think there's still, I mean, I don't know if you people remember, but in the 90s you had basically far-right mobs burning down asylum centers in the East, right? And I mean, the identitarian movement, certainly in Germany and Austria, is quite strong. At least in the East, you know, maybe not so strong in the West near Holland and Belgium. But yeah, I think it's dark times for France, for sure. Dark times for the UK, England especially. Dark times for Sweden and Belgium. I mean, Belgium is, I think, essentially already overrun, right? I mean, they've got Brussels, they've got Wallonia, and they've got Moroccans, Arabs, you know. That's pretty much it. Let me know in the comments. I mean, I could go on and on with predictions here, but those are my thoughts just coming to me randomly now. So yeah, leave some comments down below, and see you in the next year.